Brilliant. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our very first self-management webinar. My name's Simon Kitchen. I'm the Chief Exec of Bipolar UK. And this is our very first self-management webinar for people living with bipolar, and then also their very close friends and family. So those are the people who are supporting them. We've got a real great all-star cast here tonight, and it's a real pleasure to be working with the team, the fantastic team at the National Centre for Mental Health. And you'll be hearing soon from Professor Ian Jones, who's one of the world experts on bipolar and self-management. Bipolar UK, if you're not aware, is a charity. We've been going for almost 40 years. We're a charity created by people with bipolar, for people with bipolar. And we've kept that ethos going for all of our lifetime. So we're a charity which is just about the majority of our staff are directly affected by the condition, either living with it or with close friends and family with it. And we've got over 200 volunteers that provide a range of peer support services for people living with the condition, from doing support groups all the way through to our e-community and so forth. This is obviously a very, very personal webinar for me. My personal connection to bipolar is that my brother-in-law had bipolar, and he was tragically one of the 1 in 3 people with bipolar who complete suicide every day. And we lost Kevin back at, it's almost 10 years ago now. And one of the reasons why I do my job and why I'm so passionate about the charity is because we know as a family, if we had known what bipolar was and had a better understanding of the condition, we could have supported Kevin, and he could well be with us here today. What we really wanted to do, and why we're really passionate about this webinar series, is obviously COVID-19 has had a really big impact on all of our lives and on our services. And we've had to suspend some of our face-to-face groups because of the government regulations, but we've also started to innovate new services. So we started doing our Zoom groups, which have been really popular. So when Ian and the team came to us saying that they wanted to do a webinar series using this technology, we were really excited because it's a way for us to be able to talk to hundreds of people at the same time and to be able to really kind of get some really great knowledge and wisdom out there. So this will hopefully be the first of many webinar series. If it's successful, then we'll want to do more of them. Ian's going to go through what it's based on. It's originally based on a 10-week program, which is obviously a lot longer. But we really wanted to kind of bring it down so people get a flavour of what the webinar series is about, what self-management of bipolar is about. So it's going to be a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it might well open up more questions that we can then start to answer in future sessions as well. So all of you on this, if you're able to take the time at the very end to complete an evaluation form that's going to be coming around, just tell us what you think. Is this something that's really useful for you? Has it helped you self-manage bipolar better yourself, or helped you support your loved one? So we really want to know, because if you like it, we want to do more of them. So just to run through what we're going to be covering over the next 3 weeks, this one's really about the basics, looking at what causes bipolar, some of the myths, some of the misconceptions of it, what are the benefits of self-management. We're then going to be looking next week at some of the different approaches to self-management, so looking at medication, which is a key part of it, but also psychological processes, and also around lifestyle approaches you could take to self-management. And then our final week in August, if you're still with us, hopefully you are. You might have just joined us for this one, but do sign up for the next two. We're going to be looking at mood monitoring and early warning signs, and then identifying triggers, because if you're in control of your bipolar and you're self-aware of it, that can play a really big role in helping you being able to take action to be able to avoid any kind of episodes and so forth, and help you being able to live the life that you want to lead. So that's my wonderful welcome. Welcome on board. I really hope you enjoy tonight, and I'll be sticking around to the end so I can take some questions. And now I'm going to hand over to Professor Ian Jones.
Thank you, Simon. That's fantastic to be part of this development and work with Bipolar UK on this. Just to give you some background, in the National Centre for Mental Health in Cardiff, we've been, for about the last decade, developing our psychoeducation program. And now psychoeducation is an approach that's important, it's evidence-based, and I think it's underused across the UK, and we really want to promote this way of helping people who live with bipolar live the best lives that they can. We've delivered our 10-week group session to over 750 people now, and with fantastic feedback. What I really wanted to say is that this isn't a substitute for that group course, and what I think this might do is give you a little bit of a taster of the kinds of things that are covered in a psychoeducation program, with the hope that you'll be really interested to kind of agitate locally as well. So if this isn't something that's available to you through the NHS locally, for you to ask questions about why that is and help work with us, with Bipolar UK, to really put pressure on the health service to kind of deliver this more widely, because we really do believe it's something that can be of enormous help. Last thing I did want to say was we're really learning about how to do this, how to use the technology, how to deliver it. So please forgive us if it's a little bit ragged around the edges. Stick with us. Yeah, as Simon says, fill out the feedback forms. Let us know what worked, what didn't, and how you think it could be improved, and we'll really try and work with you to make this better. What we're going to do, I'm going to hand over to Kat in a second, who's going to play the content for about half an hour or so, and then we're going to come back together as a panel to discuss, answer some of the questions. What I've really learned in my involvement in the psychoeducation program that we've been delivering for a number of years now is that the most important component of it, perhaps, is people learning from each other, people learning from those with lived experience of bipolar. Now, that's what I think is most lacking from delivering it, the content in this way, but we'll try our best to give some interactivity. What we're going to do as well is, undoubtedly there are going to be lots of questions that we're not going to be able to come to today, but Kat will bring those together, and we'll put up a FAQ page on our website that will let you know where you can find, where we'll try and answer some of those questions. So just before kicking off, I just wanted to, you've met myself, you've met Simon, just wanted to introduce you to some of the other members of the team that are going to be delivering the program today and going to be on the panel at the end for the questions. So if I could just first ask Kate if she'd introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate. I've been working at the National Centre for Mental Health for the last year, and recently started facilitating the BEPC booster session, which again is kind of a bite-sized version of the full 10-week BEPC program.
Thanks, Kate. If I could ask Holly now to say hello.
Hey everyone, so I'm Holly. I work as a senior psychology assistant at the National Centre for Mental Health at Cardiff University with my colleague Kate. And like Kate, I've been helping to facilitate some of the BEPC bite-sized sessions.
And Alice, could you say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I also work at the National Centre for Mental Health as part of the field team. So I'm usually involved in meeting people to take part in research. But thanks to COVID, my role's changed quite a bit. So I've been able to get involved in some other really great opportunities such as this.
And last, as a member of the NCMH team, can I introduce you to John? John, do you want to say hello to everybody?
Hi everyone, my name's John. I'm a community psychiatric nurse, a CPN for half the week, and I work with the NCMH for the other half of the week, including doing the BEPC programs, along with Ian.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And then it's really important that we wanted to have the voice of lived experience as part of the panel as well. And so we've asked two fantastic members of the team to be involved, Sarah and Hannah. So Sarah, can I ask you to say hello?
Hello, I'm Sarah. I have attended the course, and I have lived experience of bipolar.
Thank you, Sarah. And then last but very much not least, Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a previous participant of the bipolar education program and have lived experience of bipolar disorder.
Thanks, Hannah. So you met all of us that are going to be involved in delivering the content today, and we'll be around on the panel. So with that, if I hand you over to Kat, who's going to play the content, and we'll come back in about half an hour to take some of your questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Holly, and today I'm going to be talking you through our first session on what bipolar disorder is. So looking at our first slide, bipolar disorder can be a complex, serious and disabling mental illness for many individuals. It is characterised by episodes of low mood, otherwise known as depression, and high mood, also known as mania or hypermania. The severity of episodes can vary between individuals. For example, one individual may have frequent episodes of depression and severe mania, impacting on their ability to work, function, and so on. This severe form of the illness affects some 1 to 2% of the population and is coined bipolar disorder type 1. Milder episodes of mania, otherwise known as hypermania, have been identified in patients with depression or recurrent depression. This form of the illness is now recognised as bipolar disorder type 2. So how common is the condition? Bipolar is one of the UK's most common long-term conditions. It is unknown exactly how many people have bipolar disorder, but it could be as much as 5% of the population. It is also estimated that it takes an average of 9 years to receive a correct diagnosis of bipolar. Previous participants who have participated in the bipolar psychoeducation course developed the following statements after thinking about misconceptions of bipolar disorder. Firstly, that it's your fault. It's a character flaw. Having bipolar is a personality defect. And lastly, it's the new trendy diagnosis to have. Of course, all of these 4 statements are false. Bipolar disorder is diagnosed when an individual has experienced at least 1 episode of depression and at least 1 episode of mania or hypermania. The condition can be subdivided into bipolar type 1 and bipolar type 2. Cyclothymia can also be a part of the bipolar spectrum. One individual may have frequent episodes of depression and severe mania, which can impact their ability to work, function, and so on. Bipolar type 1 is diagnosed where individuals experience severe mania for at least 1 week. 60% of manic episodes experienced are followed by a major depressive episode. The average age of onset for a first episode is 18 years old. Going on to the next slide, milder episodes of mania, otherwise known as hypermania, have been identified in patients with depression or recurrent depression. This is now recognised as bipolar type 2. To be diagnosed with this type of bipolar, individuals must have experienced hypomanic symptoms for at least 4 days and depressive symptoms for at least 2 weeks. The first episode of mood is usually depressive and occurs during your mid-20s on average. If diagnosed with type 2, individuals are at a greater chance of experiencing episodes over their lifetime, compared with bipolar type 1 or those diagnosed with major depression. There are also other presentations of bipolar disorder, such as cyclothymia. This diagnosis is used to describe individuals who experience regular cycles of mood from periods of mild depressive symptoms to periods of mild hypomanic symptoms over a course of at least 2 years. Symptoms must be present for at least half the time and no less than 2 months. Although symptoms don't reach the threshold for a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, such events can remain significant and disabling in the person's life. On average, individuals start experiencing such episodes during early childhood or adolescence. There is thought to be a 15 to 50% risk that cyclothymia will later develop into bipolar type 2. Some individuals may also experience manic type symptoms during depressive episodes, as well as depressive symptoms during manic episodes. These are called mixed affective episodes. Other individuals who experience 4 or more episodes of depression or mania within a 12-month period are often diagnosed with rapid cycling. Ultra-rapid cycling describes significant changes in mood within 1 week or even 1 day and can be very destabilizing to a person's quality of life. Presentations of mixed episodes and rapid cycling can be challenging to manage, both by the person suffering with bipolar and the clinicians involved in their care. So going on to the next slide, what is the difference between unipolar depression and bipolar depression? Unipolar illness refers to a disorder of depressive episodes with no manic or hypomanic episodes, whereas bipolar depression refers to the depressive episodes in bipolar disorder when an individual has experienced manic episodes or hypomanic episodes previously. Symptoms of anxiety frequently coexist with bipolar disorder. Anxiety disorder can include generalized anxiety disorder, otherwise termed as GAD, panic disorder, and also obsessive compulsive disorder, termed OCD. It has been reported that OCD symptoms might improve during episodes of elevated mood. As mentioned in one of the earlier slides, mixed episodes are not unusual. Psychotic symptoms are also commonly experienced in severe episodes of depression or mania. Broadly speaking, psychosis is an altered mental state marked by a change in thinking and behaviour with a loss of contact with reality. For example, hearing the Queen speaking to you, known as an auditory hallucination, or thinking that you were responsible for causing a natural disaster, also known as a delusion. Presentations of psychosis can also include disorganized thoughts, behavior, and paranoia. Hallucinations are sensory experiences without any stimulus and can be experienced by all 5 of the senses, which are hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching. A delusion is a false belief that is resistant to reason or logic. It is this kind of absolute conviction which makes beliefs such as this psychotic in nature. Delusions can vary in content and include paranoid, persecutory delusions, for example, the belief that neighbours are spying on you. As discussed earlier, it takes an average of 9 years to receive a correct diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Research has shown that on average, there is a gap of 6 years between first seeing your doctor and receiving the correct diagnosis. There are a number of reasons as to why a diagnosis of bipolar is often delayed. One being that there are other mental health diagnoses that mimic the presentation of bipolar disorder. For example, substance use disorders, certain anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even schizophrenia. Some people can be misdiagnosed. People with bipolar can have other diagnoses as well. Symptoms of anxiety frequently coexist with bipolar disorder, which can lead to complex symptomatology, making the diagnosis and treatment of bipolar disorder more challenging. An individual may experience a number of different symptoms over time, including episodes of depression, mixed affective states, and mania. Patients are more likely to make contact with health professionals in times of depression than mania, where a misdiagnosis of unipolar depression may be made. So here are a list of symptoms which may be experienced by individuals when experiencing periods of low mood or depressive episodes. Some individuals will experience some, but not all of these symptoms, which can impact the way you think about the world and yourself. These symptoms can also manifest themselves into certain types of behaviours, examples that you can see on the slide here. The next slide focuses on symptoms which may be experienced during periods of high mood or manic or hypomanic episodes. Depending on the severity of a manic episode, some but not all of the symptoms listed may be experienced. As with depression, these symptoms can also manifest themselves into certain types of behaviours. So thinking about the course of your illness since you first started experiencing symptoms can be a useful way of thinking about previous triggers and stresses. Classically, in the typical course of bipolar disorder, sufferers experience episodes of depression or mania that last anything from days to months. In between episodes, you may feel totally normal. Sometimes there may be an identifiable trigger for the episode, but other times the episode may seem to come out of the blue. It is important to remember that bipolar disorder is a chronic condition and there is no cure for it. However, the use of medication or psychological support therapies, as well as managing lifestyle factors, can be extremely helpful in keeping yourself as well as you possibly can and aid in preventing further episodes of depression or mania. There are 3 key messages to remember. Number 1, bipolar disorder is a complex brain disorder in which people experience episodes of low and high mood. 2, bipolar disorder is not a character flaw, a personality defect, or your own fault. And lastly, everyone experiences changes in mood from time to time. People with bipolar disorder do not just have severe mood swings, but can experience severe episodes of illness. Thank you very much for listening to the presentation today.
Hi, I'm Kate, working at the NCMH National Centre for Mental Health and a facilitator of the BEPC programme. Today's webinar will be talking about the causes of bipolar disorder. So we've established that bipolar disorder is characterised by episodes of depression and episodes of hypomania and mania. In today's webinar, we'll discuss the causes and some of the current theories surrounding bipolar disorder. I'm sure you'll be already aware of some of the ideas and causes, and some of you may have been told different things by health professionals, such as your GP, psychiatrist, or psychiatric nurse. However, it is important to highlight that we don't fully understand the causes of bipolar and some of the risk factors we will discuss that may not directly apply to your case. Although the exact cause of bipolar is still unknown, it is widely accepted that there is a complex interaction between several different risk factors, such as biological differences and genetics. Along these genetic predispositions, there is growing evidence to suggest the profound effect environment and lifestyle has on the disorder's onset and severity. Bipolar and the brain. Researchers believe that bipolar is caused by the brain's circuits malfunctioning and an imbalance in chemicals called neurotransmitters. Bear with me while we get a little bit technical here, but there are many neurotransmitters in the brain, with 3 being particularly pertinent to mood disorders. These are noradrenaline, serotonin, and dopamine. There's evidence to suggest that an imbalance in one or more of these chemicals is enough for a person to show signs and symptoms of bipolar. So there are 3 main neurotransmitters. High levels of noradrenaline have been linked to patients experiencing episodes of mania. The neural pathways that are responsible for emotional reward are regulated by dopamine, and a deficiency in dopamine has been linked to a loss of motivation, which is a defining characteristic of depression. Low levels of serotonin have also been consistently linked to mood disorders, in particular depression and bipolar. So, bipolar and genetics. There's a very strong evidence that genetic factors play an important role in bipolar disorder. It's estimated that if you have a first-degree relative, sibling, or parent with bipolar disorder, your lifetime risk of developing the most severe form of the disorder is increased from around 1 in 100 in the general population to around 1 in 10. Identical twins have exactly the same genetic makeup, and studies have shown if one twin develops the disorder, the other twin has a 60% chance of developing it at some point in their lifetime. The fact that this is not 100% confirms what we have said earlier. Bipolar is not completely genetic. It is caused by genetic risk factors interacting with non-genetic or environmental risk factors, such as stress, alcohol use, drug use, lifestyle. The reason for studying genetic bases of bipolar disorder is to understand how genetic risk factors interact with the environmental factors, such as stress, to cause episodes of depression or hypomania. Another reason is to develop much better treatments than the one currently available. Risk factors and triggers. The key point in thinking about what causes bipolar disorder is to think about what your unique combination of risk factors might be. Remembering that some of the risk factors may not apply to you, and some have differing levels of vulnerability, perhaps via genetic mechanisms. Although we may be able to do little about someone's underlying causes of bipolar disorder, such as your genetics, paying attention to triggers such as stress, sleep, exercise, diet, drug use, and alcohol use can have a profound effect on your experience of mood symptoms and the likelihood of relapses. One way to understand this interaction between genetic predisposition and our environment is the stress vulnerability model. We are all different and we all cope with stress differently. The stress container, i.e. the bucket, represents our vulnerability and capacity to deal with stress in our lives. We all have a different size container and deal with situations and experiences differently. These are the things that cause our stress levels to rise. Stresses and risk factors build up until they reach a certain level. Once the critical level has been reached, the container will overflow and we become unwell. This could be described as a malfunctioning mood thermostat in the brain. If we can recognise our stress indicators through monitoring our mood and well-being, we may have the opportunity to positively respond to early warning signs and mitigate the impact of an episode through implementing self-management techniques, which we'll discuss later on in these webinars. The important thing to remember is that each of our buckets are different, and research argues that our vulnerability predisposition is a fairly permanent trait. Therefore, developing tools and strategies to cope with these stresses is imperative to better mental health. So what is stress and when does it become too much? If we think about the purpose of a stress test for materials, it can help shed some light on what the term stress actually means. The aim of a stress test is to establish how much pressure and force is needed before the crunch point. Similarly, in humans, we also have a crunch point or an overflow, which will differ from person to person and from time to time, where we can no longer take any more excessive pressure or demand without consequences on our mental health. We can identify if stress is becoming a problem if a change in our disposition becomes so great that it begins to influence and affect jobs, relationships, and the things we enjoy. So take a few minutes to decide how your bucket might look, what stresses would be in it, how full it might be, and maybe think about your own coping strategies. The main message when it comes to discussion of causes of bipolar is to remember that not one person will have the exact same experience as you, and there is a complex biological, genetic, and psychological interaction that establishes your condition.
The COVID-19 crisis represents perhaps one of the biggest collective challenges to the well-being of the UK population in living memory. Not only is it a threat to our physical health, but it also presents a great challenge to our mental health. Research has shown that levels of depression, anxiety, and stress have been elevated amongst the general population throughout the crisis. And this is perhaps unsurprising given the impact it's had on all of our lives. In such exceptional times then, it's important to remember that a degree of distress and worry is probably to be expected. Research is, however, also shown that there are specific groups of people who experience more impairing levels of distress, with one of these being those with existing mental health conditions. So how might this affect people with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder then? It's possible that social distancing, as well as concern about COVID itself and the impact the crisis is having on our lives, have the potential to increase anxiety and paranoia and destabilise mood. So what can be done to help prevent this from happening? First and foremost, I think it's really important to remember to be kind and compassionate towards ourselves. So the kindness that we've shown to each other as a nation has been incredible. And I believe that each small act of kindness demonstrates how we can emerge from this pandemic as a more connected and compassionate society. Showing kindness is also known to be beneficial for our mental health. So being kind can not only benefit others, but can also make us feel good about ourselves too. However, being kind towards others can feel really hard if we aren't feeling kind towards ourselves. So when we're under a lot of stress, we often have an unhelpful tendency to become excessively hard on ourselves. And when left unchecked, this can easily spiral into symptoms of anxiety and depression. In times of stress then, such as the COVID crisis, it can help to regularly check in with how you're feeling and acknowledge any distress that you might notice. So by compassionately and non-judgmentally observing and accepting distress as part of being a human being, let alone when living through a pandemic, this might help us to think about being more kind towards ourselves. The stability acronym can also be really helpful for reminding you of the actions you can take to manage your condition generally, but perhaps especially so at this time. So firstly then, S stands for sleep. Changes in sleeping patterns can be a major trigger for mood episodes, and the effect of COVID on our lifestyles may mean that we have to be extra vigilant about maintaining a routine around sleep, and fighting the desire to watch that new TV series into the early hours. Secondly, T stands for treatment. If you're prescribed medication, it's really important to continue taking this and to ensure that you have enough should you need to self-isolate. If you're in regular contact with the clinical team, it's also important to maintain this contact. Even though clinical teams may be functioning in slightly different ways due to COVID, they are still there to support you. So A stands for avoid, referring to those things to avoid which you know are likely to trigger a mood episode for you. But for lots of people, this might include things like recreational drugs or excessive amounts of alcohol. So increased levels of stress and boredom related to COVID might make these things more tempting, but are only likely to cause us further problems in the long run. It might also help to reflect on how much media you're consuming at the moment. So the media can be really helpful for enabling us to know what we need to do to prevent us catching or spreading COVID. However, the relentless stream of news on COVID can also be quite overwhelming. If you are finding this is the case, perhaps think about finding a balance with how much media is necessary to consume, and also ensuring that you're avoiding unreliable sources. So B then is for be positive. There are lots of things that you can do to stay well, and now might be a good time to reflect on these and to try and ensure that you're continuing to find ways to do these things despite the potential challenges presented by COVID. I stands for intervention. So if you or others around you recognise that your mood is deteriorating, get help sooner rather than later. Again, services are still there to support you. They recognise that now is a really challenging time and they want you to contact them should you need to. L stands for lifestyle, and we'll be talking a bit more about this in the next webinar. But following a regular routine can be really difficult given all of the changes we've had to make to our lives. So as well as maintaining a good sleeping pattern, trying to ensure you're finding ways to keep in regular contact with friends and family, to remain as active as possible and to maintain a balanced diet will all likely be really helpful, even if sometimes it's hard to find things to break up the day other than going back and forth to the fridge. So I stands for inform, meaning inform yourself and others close to you about bipolar disorder. It can also help to regularly keep others informed as to how you are and what steps they can take to help you in a crisis, especially if you're living alone. The second T stands for triggers. Monitoring your mood and identifying what makes you more likely to relapse can be some of the most important things that you can do to manage your condition, as they can help you to create a plan of how to spot changes in your mood and to take steps to prevent these from getting out of hand. Finally, Y stands for you. This is to say that there are many things that you can do to help take control of your condition. I think it can also be helpful to encourage you to focus on making looking after yourself a priority throughout the crisis, and remembering that we don't need to be doing more, but rather that we should be focusing on how we can adapt to ensure we continue to do the things that keep us well. So many of us have found ourselves with more time on our hands as a result of the crisis, but this doesn't mean we should necessarily be trying to become a home fitness guru or learning how to make the perfect banana bread, as my social media might have me assume. So thinking about getting through the crisis as a marathon rather than a sprint might be helpful. If you can remember what day it is, give yourself a pat on the back. And if you don't come out of lockdown having learned 5 new languages, that's perfectly okay. I, for one, will be emerging from lockdown only having mastered looking like Cousin It from the Addams Family, but with a lot more split ends.
There's lots of research to show that knowing about and having an understanding of any health condition that you may have can have a positive effect on your experiences and the impact of that condition. And this applies to both mental health and physical health conditions. So this is where psychoeducation comes in, although some people prefer the term health education, and it seems to make perfect sense. Whilst of course it might not take away the challenges and difficulties that having a chronic health condition can bring with it, knowing about it, what it is, possible causes, various treatments, and how you can make living with it easier, and just as importantly, recognizing those things that actually make it worse, can be immensely useful. And this is part of the basis of self-management. Hannah and Sarah are two people who have taken part in our psychoeducation programme, and here they are to tell us a little bit more.
Psychoeducation can be undertaken in many different formats, from self-learning, one-to-one discussions with clinicians, or in group formats, such as with the Bipolar Education Programme Cymru. This is the programme that I attended, and it's run through the National Centre for Mental Health at Cardiff University. It involves 11 weekly sessions lasting up to 2.5 hours with 3 facilitators. This includes 2 clinicians and someone that has lived in experience of bipolar who has already completed the course. So far, we have completed a grand total of 66 courses and had nearly 700 participants throughout Wales.
Briefly, the course covers all these topics. It discusses the various presentations of bipolar disorder, the symptoms that can be experienced, the different diagnoses such as bipolar 1, bipolar 2 and cyclothymia. We discuss the possible causes for bipolar disorder, making it clear that we do not know for sure what the cause can be, but suggest it's a complex interaction between genetic or biological and environmental or stressful factors. A large part of the course is aimed at self-management techniques, including monitoring mood, identifying triggers, and recognising early warning signs of relapse. And psychoeducation is useful for physical health conditions, including diabetes, eczema, and many cardiac concerns, as well as mental health conditions, including anxiety, depression, and psychosis.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a community mental health nurse working in Cardiff, and I've been helping to facilitate the Bipolar Education Programme Cymru, the BEPC courses, for a number of years now. And can I introduce Hannah and Sarah, who have taken part in the course, and they've happily agreed to come along and answer these questions about their experiences of the course. Hi, Hannah, and hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi.
So, Hannah and Sarah, do you think that your knowledge and understanding of bipolar has increased since attending the course, the BEPC course? Hannah, can I start with you? Do you think your knowledge and understanding of bipolar has increased since attending the course?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that knowledge and understanding has sort of changed my perspective on bipolar too. So instead of it being something big and scary that you don't know if you can handle, it's now something that's manageable and something that I can accept even when it's not so manageable.
So Hannah, what do you think it was about the course that made it so useful for you?
I'd say that it's having other people who have similar experiences that makes you not feel so alone.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I thought it was a really beneficial course. Self-learning in order to allow yourself better self-management. It, for me, has been a real positive. So yeah, I've really benefited from the course and all the things that Hannah said, really.
Sarah, I think on the course that you were on, there were about a dozen people there, and they were all different stages of diagnosis and their experiences with bipolar disorder. Do you think it was useful meeting different people who are going through different stages like that?
Yeah, definitely, because you can share sort of your experience at a moment that someone else maybe hasn't experienced, and the fact that we came from different lifestyles and different backgrounds, it was really positive, that we had a commonality, even though you were so different. So yeah.
And did you ever think that I don't know if you knew, or did you know many people who had bipolar disorder before you met the course? Yeah. And I think that's one of the good things about the course, is meeting lots of people with a condition, so you don't feel that you're on your own struggling with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Hannah, going back to you, I mean, we're not saying that the course, we're far from saying that the bipolar course will answer everything you will ever want to know about bipolar disorder. But do you think it's helped you, helped to learn about, okay, it hasn't really answered all your questions, but it's helped to understand about understanding it?
Yes, I think that I knew some things before I started the course, but I definitely learned new things on the course. And I think that basically the more knowledge you have of your mental health and other conditions, then the better equipped you are to deal with it. When you have an episode, you can learn what works best for you, because what works best for you, you know, that could change as well in the future. So if you have a lot of different things to draw on, then you can use one of those.
And you
Helps
can
you
build
identify
on
triggers and things like that. So you're better prepared and you're more aware of those triggers, so you can avoid them, and you know, yeah, sorry,
No, I understand what you mean. And Hannah, I think in your group, there were just under a dozen people in your group. And again, like Sarah, they all came from different backgrounds. But do you think you learned almost as much, if not more, from the other people around the table than you did from the facilitators?
Yeah, definitely. I think to some degree, you know, doctors, psychiatrists, nurses, they can give you all the information, but sometimes they don't really have an understanding of it, of what it's actually like. They have their knowledge, but it's different to have lived experience.
Of course. So they can see it, but they can't actually not feel it, if you want to.
Yeah.
As a thing. Okay. I mean, the course you were on, Sarah, was very lively.
Yes. Yeah. And
there are a couple of characters in there. They're very lively. They're trying to work out who they were.
Yeah. No. We were all really different, and I think that was what was so interesting. You know, how different we were, and yet we shared this diagnosis, this mental health issue, and it brought us together. And I think we supported one another quite a lot.
And I think both of you stayed in touch with people on the course afterwards, which is really quite nice. And I think it's also nice that the normality is having bipolar disorder in the room, and everyone accepts that and everyone understands that. And I think that's good.
For me, I think I didn't actually want to go on the course initially because I was terrified of being in a room full of people talking about something I thought was quite personal. But that ended up being probably the best part of the course.
And the jokes.
The jokes were the worst part.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. I apologise for that. Hannah, what was the most important part of the course for you? What were the most important parts?
I think, other than meeting all the people and understanding that there are a lot more people in the world that have bipolar and manage well and can live with it, you know, I think that for me it was learning how to manage my condition, what works for me. So figuring out my early warning signs. When do I need to start upping the self-care? And, you know, maybe writing down a routine, that kind of thing. Just being able to check in on myself. And that has really helped me manage with my mental health.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Sarah, what do you think for you? What were the most important parts?
Yeah, the things that Hannah said, definitely. But I think towards the end, there was an opportunity for members of your family or somebody close to come in. And I'd been struggling for a long time, feeling that no one really understood my world. And I found that last bit really beneficial because they came, they heard from experts, and they came out with a different attitude. It was really positive for me.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that. That's one of the things we added to the course from feedback when we first started doing the course. There were two things that we added from feedback. One was having a facilitator who had lived experience of the course, which was very useful. And the other thing was having a separate session for your friends and families to come along and find out more about bipolar disorder. I'm glad you found it useful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, both you, Hannah and Sarah, and bringing your personal experiences of the course and your descriptions of psychoeducation, which is a very useful intervention in managing all chronic conditions, including bipolar disorder. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So in the remaining time, we said that we'd aim to be around an hour, so maybe because of those few difficulties, we'll let it slip by 5 minutes or so, just to give us a little bit of time for questions. But I've been going through the questions that people sent in before, and some of those that people have been typing during the call. A lot of those during the call have been practical questions about the course and how to get access, and we'll, as I say, we'll look at those and put together an FAQ that we'll give people access to. But I'm going to kick off the questions to the panel with a question that came in when somebody wrote us to say, I was diagnosed 27 years ago. Can you recover from bipolar disorder? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask John, who's sat through most of the 66 sessions that we've delivered and helped deliver them, to address that question first. John, what from the discussions that have happened in the BEPC courses over the years have people had to say about this prospect of recovering from bipolar disorder? What would you say to that question?
Thanks, Ian, for giving me this question. Much appreciate it. I don't know. It depends what you. Sorry, I thought you were going to answer it for me. It depends what you mean by recovery, really. I mean, I don't know. It depends what you mean by recovery. It's a chronic health condition. I mean, if you mean recovery is a lack of episodes of illness, or if episodes do come along and the symptoms are less severe, I suppose you could say that is recovery. I think from my clinical experience, if someone has a number of episodes of bipolar disorder, then they possibly will carry on having episodes of bipolar disorder.
I think people can live better, though, can't they, John? I think that's the philosophy of what we're trying to say, is that you can help yourself to live the best life that you can.
Of course, yeah. Through a combination of self-management, good treatment interventions such as medication or psychological approaches, and paying attention to your lifestyle. So, yeah, there we are.
Sarah, Hannah, as people who lived with this condition, have you got anything to add about that prospect of recovering and sort of being cured? What do you think? What would you say in response to these questions?
Well, there is no magical cure for it. I think that I guess years ago, when I first started displaying symptoms, I thought I was in the worst place ever and there was nowhere to go. And now I'm living a relatively normal, that's not a good word to use, but a relatively stable life. And my lifestyle has changed to accommodate for it. And I'm enjoying myself, So considering where I was to where I am now, definite improvement from learning how to manage my condition.
That sounds like a good outcome to me.
Yeah, and I think acceptance, the better understanding and an acceptance instead of fighting against it, those things for me, that mindset shift of accepting this is a condition that I have and I can work with it, and there are things that I can do to make my life smoother with it. I think that's been seen a shift in sort of my episodes.
And thanks, Sarah. Simon, have you got anything from Bipolar UK's point of view from this? Is this an issue that's addressed to the charity often? Yeah,
it comes up a lot about recovery. Apologies, everyone. I think I was the only person who didn't actually stop my video, so I think all of you were watching me for a bit. So I'm really glad that you could join me for those private moments. In terms of recovery, there's a kind of two impact to the condition, isn't there? There's the kind of the impact of like having the episodes, but then it's also the recovering from the kind of potential damage that might have been done during those episodes. So people might have ended up being sectioned, they could have been in hospital, and they might have ended up coming out with post-traumatic stress as well. So people could have taken on debt that they didn't want to. So I think recovery can be also seen in the wider sense of kind of ironing out those things. So I'd always recommend for people, if they can, to access talking therapies, because I think that's a really important tool for people to be able to help come to terms with the condition, but also to be able to acknowledge some of the things, dramatic things that they've experienced in their life that's going to have a kind of secondary impact on them as well. But I'd also say you can always live well with bipolar. Yeah.
And I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? And that's what we're trying to communicate about in these webinars. This is what the BEPC program is about, and that's what the charity, I know, is very keen to promote, is helping people live with this condition, but live the best life that they can. And you know, and there's so many examples of how people can do that, which are really encouraging, I think. Second question I've picked out, and obviously this, you know, like from the many questions that we've got, it's ones that have really interested me, I think, and I think they kind of reflect some of the issues that we keep coming back to in the groups. One of the issues that we keep coming back to is the relationship with people's families, and one of the questions is, what advice do we have about communicating with your family about your bipolar disorder? Anybody want to kick off on that?
Sarah?
Sarah, John's volunteered you. Yeah. Have you got any advice?
I think being very open with your communication, and for them to understand and recognize the signposts when things are dipping or things are rising, so that they can help you. I think having that open communication and being very honest is really important. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. That's useful. Hannah, have you got anything to add to that?
I guess in my experience, some family are more supportive than others, and the ones that are, you know, I call my mother every day, so she is very supportive to me. And yeah, I just think that it's important to communicate with them. You know, I've told my mum, if I get sick again, if I have an episode again, these are the steps I want to take. You know, I have it written down. She knows the plan. So if I can't take care of myself, then there is somebody in place that can.
Excellent. John, have you anything to add from discussions in the course over the years on this?
Not really.
I mean, the session that we offered to friends and family has been really useful, hasn't it? I think
it has been really useful. I mean, bipolar disorder doesn't affect the person, but it affects the person with the condition, but it affects the people all around them as well. And there is a lot of lack of knowledge about the condition and the best things to do. And I think it's plugged a gap, you know, pretty well for it. We started doing, I mean, we had sessions for friends and family or participants, and then we started doing one-off sessions for people. We advertised one-off sessions for family members to come along. And yeah, they've all worked. I think we've done about 60 people have gone through it, or perhaps it's more. Yeah, but it's done really well. It's gone down really well.
What John, are the kind of, from that experience of all those groups that you facilitated of friends and family, what are the most common questions that come up from friends and family in that course? What do people want to know the most, do you think?
I can't remember, Ian. I don't know. I know that everyone was really glad to meet other people in the same situation, to realise they weren't on their own. And I think that's the same for the BEPC course as well, for the participants on there. Everyone thinks they might know of other people with bipolar disorder, but they haven't talked in depth about the condition or what makes it worse, what makes it better. And it just reduces that isolation. And it's worked out really, really well. It's just what Sarah.
Excellent, thanks, John.
Yep.
Anybody else got anything they want to add on that point? Shall we move on to the next question? Simon, you got anything?
Well, no, I did a rather fun interview with Closer magazine today, because obviously there's in the news with Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, and I think that's she's obviously been struggling with how to manage his bipolar, and it's been interesting seeing that go through the news. But I think it's just being kind to yourself and to seek out support when you need it. Sometimes you're going to have to get doctors involved and call for psychiatric emergency involvement if people go into a manic episode. But equally, I think the earlier, was it Hannah earlier on was saying about forward planning? I think that's so important, because when someone gets into a manic state, it becomes a really difficult relationship to then manage, because you're having to make decisions on their behalf and you don't know what they want. But actually, if you can look back on previous episodes and sit down as a family and plot out what people want to happen or not happen, then you can see what you're doing it out of love. And that can really help, because a lot of carers can feel a lot of guilt around it. So I think those are really good suggestions that you've had on the panel so far.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Simon. So I'm going to, although we've come to 8 o'clock, as I say, I'm going to just take a few more minutes because we had some delays with the technical side. And ask 2 more questions, actually. The first one is, I've been told bipolar disorder is a chemical imbalance. Is this right? Kate, that was the section that you covered in your section on causes. Difficult question, but I guess we'd say that's quite a simplistic way of representing the reality, isn't it? What would you say?
Yeah, massively. Like it is obviously part of the condition is the changes of chemicals in the brain which lead to different mood symptoms, but there's a multitude of other things: lifestyle, routines, social factors, genetic predispositions, and it's a complex interaction of all of those different things that lead to the severity of your condition or the onset of your condition. And I think understanding those different parts can help you become to accept your condition more and to just gain a better understanding of what bipolar is.
Thanks, Kat. I think just back that, I think that's beautifully put. I'm very suspicious of anybody that tells you that bipolar disorder or any other condition is one thing or another and its causes. These are very complicated, multifactorial things, and it's not just your genes, it's not just the chemicals in your brain, it's not just what happened to you as a child, or your personality. These are all of these things acting together. So, aware of time, I'm going to just push on to the last question, and unless anybody desperately wants to get in and answer and tell us what does cause bipolar disorder, if anybody's got the answer, speak now. Thought not. Okay, great. So I'm going to just finish off with one question. I think, Alice, this was something that came up in your section of the talk. What are the most important triggers that have, for bipolar disorder? What would you say? And maybe after hearing from you, we can go to John and see what's come out in the course about what people have said. What for them are the most important triggers for this illness?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess it's, there are certain triggers which might be common to lots of people, but then there are also triggers which could be quite kind of unique to you, I guess. And I think obviously, stressful things happen in your life, COVID, recently being or currently being one of them. But also kind of perhaps for lots of people, things like drug and alcohol use might have an impact in terms of kind of triggering episodes. Changes in your lifestyle and routines. We're going to talk about quite a bit in some of the coming sessions as well, just how important it can be to maintain routines and how anything that kind of changes those can be a bit of a trigger in itself, I guess.
And just picking out one thing that you said that I think is really important is it's really important to look for the individual things that for you and your condition. Sarah, have you got anything to say on that about triggers? Was that something that came up in the courses that you attended?
Early on in the course, you sort of do a map of your past, and you look at events that could have, pushed you higher to overflow that bucket of stress and anxiety. And I found that quite interesting. And then I started looking at sort of like patterns. So yeah, that was an interesting bit of the course, sort of like looking back and seeing how significant things have pushed me to a place where I am now. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Hannah, is any looking at those triggers for you? Is that a useful exercise to do?
Yeah, definitely. Like now that I know things like sleep, if I don't go to bed early enough, then I can feel, you know, my stress creeping in, and if I'm not getting enough sleep, I get stressed more easily, and that leads to potential episodes as well. So sometimes it's small things that you don't even think about that creep up on you, and then, you know, it's hard to manage. So
yeah, I think sleep can be a really common one for a lot of people with bipolar disorder, can't it? But sometimes that's difficult to disentangle whether sleep is a symptom of episode of illness coming on or the trigger itself. But clearly paying attention to that is really important. Yeah. Anybody got any final comments on that before we close?
I think hormones are also a big trigger to episodes. I mean, you know, Ian, you've done a lot of work on this, haven't you? So you'd know more.
I suppose
certainly more than
my
me.
particular area of interest, kind of having a baby, is a very strong trigger for some women with bipolar disorder. So yeah, and that's obviously something that we've studied a lot in Cardiff. So yeah, I'd agree with that, John. Yeah,
I would say that just even a bit of a topic, but even PMS, you know, that can have a huge impact.
I think I mean, it's a theme that we'll keep coming back to in the webinars, and we keep coming back to in the course in general, is looking at yourself as an individual. That this isn't, you know, identifying what those triggers are for you, and some of those exercises that we do in the course that Sarah talked about. That's why they're particularly useful to you, rather than talking in generalities. Look, you know, for me with my illness, what are the things that have been important in, you know, helping keep me well, but also help triggering off episodes of illness. So, Simon, should I give the last opportunity for you to sum things up before we close tonight, and ask people to please come back next week, because next week we'll have all the technical gremlins completely sorted out and everything's going to be perfect. We promise.
Thanks, Ian. Don't worry. I'll be here in another jazzy shirt. So if it goes wrong, people can just watch me sitting around. So don't stress.
I think you've thrown down the jazzy shirt challenge there, Simon, and I'm going to have to try and respond to. So it's going to be worth coming back to see who wins.
Bring it on, the Paisley challenge. I just want to say a massive thank you, Ian, to you and the team, and for pulling it together. I mean, I've been doing this job for a couple of years now, and I learned so much from that presentation. And it really helps me understand bipolar much better. I'd like to kind of round up by just saying there's a lot of negativity around bipolar, and bipolar is a really difficult condition to live with, and there's not a lot of sugarcoating it, but there is a lot of hope as well, which is that it is possible to live well with bipolar. And I've met in my job thousands of people with, well, I've probably met hundreds of people with bipolar who are doing great things in their jobs and their careers. And I know that there must be hundreds of thousands of them out there across the UK. And I think if you're just coming to this fresh and it's the first time you just got a diagnosis, it is possible to live well with bipolar. It's not going to get any worse than what it's been. You can improve your self-management, and you can still go out there and achieve what you want to with your life. So it requires a lot of work. It's not a fair kind of deal, but it is possible to live well with bipolar and to achieve your potential. And there's a charity, we're there to help you, and also the fantastic work that Ian and your team are doing as well. So go away with some hope, hopefully.
I think that's a fantastic positive message to finish on. I think that's the key that underlines everything that we're about with both the charity, Bipolar UK, BEPC and the NCMH programme of work. It's about living with this condition. We know it can be serious, we know it can be severe, but live in the best way that you can. Please, 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 thank you to all of the team that have worked so hard putting this together. Apologies again for the slight technical errors. We'll work on that and make sure that we don't have that next week. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody again. And I'm definitely going to win the Jazzy Shirt contest. So I'm going to look through my wardrobe as we speak. So thanks, everybody. And good night. And we'll see you all again next week.